Open it up. There we go. So we're obviously going to talk about Deborah and Jael today. So just a bit of background. We find their story in the book of Judges in the Old Testament. You can find it in Judges 4, and then there's like a poetic sort of retelling in Judges 5. And I would recommend you go away and read both chapters if you're like watching this on YouTube. I don't know if you want to pause it now and then read it and come back. But just because even just one of those two passages are very long, so I'm not going to read it all. I'm going to just talk about the important stuff and like read those verses stuff. But their whole story is really interesting. But yeah, and so the judges were come before the kings of Israel. And they weren't sort of like the modern day legal judge that we have now in like a courtroom. They were more sort of leaders and advisors in sort of when Israel was in, I guess, yeah, times of trial. And Deborah is a judge, well, was a judge, and this is about 1,000 years or so before the birth of Christ. And there's quite a lot you can read into this, because she is a woman in a position of power and authority, and quite a lot of the women in the Bible, especially in the Old Testament, are just sort of like the wives or the mothers of people. They're not seen in the same sort of positions as men are, and Deborah very much is. She's the fourth judge in the book, and but she is also the only mentioned female. So you can, I guess, sort of read into that as well. But the point is that she is a woman judge. So in the part that we find in Judges 4, the Jews had been oppressed by the Canaanites for about 20 years. Which we find in Judges 4:3. In my Bible it says, because he, and that was referring to the king of the Canaanites, was very cruel to the people of Israel for 20 years, the Jews cried to the Lord for help. Sorry. So that's kind of where we find the Jews at this point. Deborah is their judge, and they have been oppressed for 20 years. And then the other sort of key person in this story, we'll come on to Jael later, but this is a man, and his name is Sisera, and he's the commander of the king's armies. So this is the king of the Canaanites, not the Jews, because as we said, the Jews don't have a king yet. And he's quite a crucial person in the story. So we read in this sort of the first kind of up to sort of about verse 11 in Judges 4, that God speaks through Deborah, and he tells her to take up arms against the Canaanites. And so she essentially goes and badgers the Israelite general into going into battle, and she goes with God, and yeah, he his name is Barak, and he is the Israelite general, and he says, yeah, okay, we'll do it. But the Israelites are massively outnumbered. They have about sort of 10,000 men, but then the Canaanites have, you know, we hear about 900 chariots. That's more than sort of one person a chariot, obviously. Like, that's a lot of people that are going to be with that. And yet the Israelites still win because they have God on their side. And this is sort of a kind of holy battle. It seems blessed in God's eyes, and there's a lot we can go into about the holy battles because they don't appear in the New Testament. But this is in the Old Testament, and it's in there, and it's blessed in God. And we see the Israelites win their freedom from the Canaanites. And this is sort of started by Deborah, and she goes with them to the battle, and she kind of, I guess, sort of leads them into this battle that they win their freedom. But Sisera, who is the commander of the Canaanites, escapes. He goes away with his life, whereas pretty much every other Canaanite in this battle is slaughtered, which is where Jael comes in. So Jael, in contrast to Deborah, she's not a great judge. She's just an ordinary woman, and yet what she does is pretty monumental in that sense. And she sort of, in many ways, works with Deborah, but it's unlikely they actually knew each other, or knew of each other as such. God uses them both to secure this kind of victory for the Israelites. So said, she's just an ordinary woman. And we find in Judges 4, the second half of Judges 4, that Sisera runs away, comes up to Jael's sort of tent, and she was actually, like, just as we said, she's a wife of someone. That's how she's referred to initially. She was the wife of Heber. And their family was at peace with the Jovian king. And so she kind of comes out to him and she says, come into my tent, you must be thirsty. She gives him food and drink. And then he falls into a deep sleep. And God moves through her to actually deliver Sisera's death. And she hammers a tent peg through his skull while he's asleep. And he dies. And that's pretty violent way to go. As we talked about, there's a lot more violence in the Old Testament. It's a little bit less, slightly crazy as it is now. But yeah, she killed him by using what she has, which is God and this tent peg. Sisera thought he could kind of control her and was safe with her, partly because she was a woman. There wasn't any men around there. She was just there, and he kind of told her what to do. He says to her in Judges 4:20, "Go and stand at the entrance to the tent. If anyone comes and asks you, is anyone here, say no." But Jael doesn't listen to him. She, as it says, kills him when he was least expecting it. Now, God uses Deborah and Jael in two ways that are quite extreme, leading people into battle and killing someone with a tent peg. And they're women in the Bible that appear in the Old Testament, and they maybe don't seem that significant. As I said, they only appear in two chapters in the Bible, in Judges 4 and Judges 5, one of which, as we said, was a retelling of Judges 4. But they together lead the Israelites into victory. And God used these women where men would have failed. Sisera probably wouldn't have trusted a man in the same way that he trusted Jael, and he thought he was safe with her, and he clearly wasn't. And in the same way, God uses Deborah as a woman, places her in a position of authority to then help lead the Israelites to victory. Which I think quite clearly shows that actually women don't just have to be the wives and mothers of people. There's great things about those, and the women and mothers we have looked at so far and will continue to look at did pretty impressive things. They had strong faith, and they did great things for their children and their spouses. But actually, that's not the only role that God uses women for. And there are two things we can sort of directly learn, I guess, from this book, which is one is to trust in God. Deborah had great faith in God. She felt that he was speaking to her, he was telling her what to do. Yes, the Israelites were going to be outnumbered, but she knew they could win because she had this faith in God. God had told her to, and she was proven right. And the other thing related to that is that right can defeat might, which explain that a bit. In the Deborah part of the story, the Israelites were fighting for good. They were God's people. They were fighting to be free. And they defeated the outnumbered Canaanite army. In the Jael part of the story, she, physically was weaker than Sarah. She wasn't a trained soldier, and she was a woman who was actually smaller, way less strong. But she triumphed over him because she was doing what was right. Now, what can we take away from this? This is a story that happened about 3,000 years ago, and I'm please him now when I say, please do not go and start hammering tent pegs through people's heads, because we do not live in that time anymore. We live in the time after Christ, and we're free through Christ. But we can learn some stuff from Deborah and Jael. The first of all is that God can use us for more than what society says we can do. Which, to kind of explain a bit that, because I'm aware I'm using slightly weird sentences, so I'll explain my point a bit. The society that Deborah and Jael lived in said that women were weak, that they couldn't do things. They couldn't be a judge. They couldn't kill a man. And yet God used them to do those things. He doesn't work along the lines of what the earthly society says we have to do. He doesn't work within those society barriers. He doesn't respect what society says about gender or race or sexuality or any of those things that we use to divide us, that can give us sort of a different position, I guess, within what we do. And so be prepared to be used by God in ways that we probably don't expect, neither would others. You can go, well, this is who I am, this is where I live, this sort of thing, so that is how God could use me. Well, actually, he doesn't listen to those things. He uses you in the ways that is best for you and is best for him. And God is never wrong. If he speaks to you and thinks that you can do something, you can. Like he spoke to Deborah and he told her that they could go to victory. And he was right. He doesn't lie to us, and he's outside of time. He can see everything. So if he knows that you can do something, he will tell you that you can do something. He does not lie. So trust in him, and you can accomplish great things with God.